Shabonaning, Shabonaning. This sketch, called Shabonaning, was published in 1855 by Lawrence Oliphant, former Civil Secretary and Superintendent General of Indian Affairs in Canada. We are looking toward the west end of the channel. George Island is on the left side of the sketch. On the right, on the mainland, is de la Mirandiere's trading post and part of the village of Shabonaning. Ani and good day. My name is Adele Loosemore and I'm a Robinson Treaty Indian from Shabonaning. My community is located at the entrance to the North Channel of Georgian Bay. And I placed a white dot on the map below to show where we are located. In this video, we're going to look at the types of evidence that the Métis Nation of Ontario used to declare people Métis. And we're also going to look at 4 families in the Métis community of Killarney who never lived in Killarney. Our First Nations ancestors are Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. But the Métis Nation of Ontario and the Province of Ontario decided to change their ethnic identity to Métis. They did this by distorting some parts of the historic record and ignoring other parts of it. This manipulation of our ethnic identity is deeply disrespectful to our ancestors and our community, and it violates the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This series of videos was created to show you that their claims are not supported by the historic record. In 2003, the Supreme Court of Canada issued the Powley decision. It deals with Métis Aboriginal rights, setting out the rules under which those rights would be recognized. A key requirement is that the right being claimed today must originate from the practices of a historic Métis community. The Supreme Court also said that not all persons of mixed Indian-European ancestry are Métis. People of mixed ancestry could be non-status Indians or status Indians, or not identify at all as having Indian ancestry. The court also made rules about what will be accepted as proof of a historic Métis community. Evidence should show that they lived together in the same geographic area and that its people developed their own customs and recognizable group identity separate from that of Indians and Europeans. In 2017, the Métis Nation of Ontario and the Province of Ontario designated Killarney and its environs a historic Métis community. But that community never existed. They created it simply by declaring that some of our Anishinaabe ancestors in each of these settlements were actually Métis people, and that they were part of one big Métis community that included all the places named on this map, as well as the towns, villages, and First Nations communities in between. Under each of the community names shown on this map are the families that MNO and the Province of Ontario claim are the Métis people who lived in the historic Métis community of Killarney. For many reasons, their claim makes no sense at all. When MNO and Ontario discuss the history of this Métis community, They talk only about events and families in Killarney Village. Not a single mention of these other people, which is not surprising, because in real life, these families did not live together as a community. The Métis Nation of Ontario's verified Métis Family Line documents contain information on the history of the family, along with birth, marriage, and death records, and MNO's rationale for claiming that members of this family are documented Métis. There is evidence that the Métis root ancestors and root ancestor descendants in this family line were documented Métis, including many family members being identified in various ways as Métis in the historic record. MNO uses that sentence in each one of their verified Métis family line assessments. And on the face of it, it sounds very impressive. The people were documented Métis. They were identified in the historic record. The only records MNO repeatedly refers to in relation to our ancestors are the 1901 census, the 1899 report on Robinson Treaty annuities, vital statistics records, and a few Indian Affairs files. None of these records refer to persons directly or indirectly as having a Métis identity. So what does MNO mean by documented Métis? MNO's verified Métis family documents about our ancestors were approved by their registrar in 2017. I'm also showing you MNO's 2019 description of a documented Métis. It leaves out a couple of words that were in the 2017 one, but you can see that it means the same thing. Presumably, these are all words that were used in the past to describe people of mixed Indian-European ancestry. In Ontario, half-breed was probably the most common one. If in some old record someone calls another person a half-breed, that's good enough for MNO. That person is now a documented Métis. Scotch breed, French breed, and other breed are categories that were used in the 1901 census. And that census is the one that MNO most often relies on as evidence that a person was Métis. But in 1901, what did the government say about people who were to be placed into these categories? Let's take a look at the instructions that the government gave to its officers and enumerators. For race or color, the races of men will be designated by the use of W for white, R for red, B for black, and Y for yellow. The whites are, of course, the Caucasian race, the reds are the American Indian, the blacks are the African or Negro, and the yellows are the Mongolian, Japanese, and Chinese. But only pure whites will be classed as whites. The children begotten of marriages between whites and any one of the other races will be classed as red, black, or yellow, as the case may be, irrespective of the degree of color. Under this instruction, people of mixed red and white races are to be classed as red, which stands for American Indian. For the category on racial or tribal origin, the 1901 census instructions said that in the case of Indians, the names of their tribes should be given, as Chippewa, Cree, etc. Persons of mixed white and red blood, commonly known as breeds, will be described by addition of the initial letters FB for French breed, EB for English breed, SB for Scotch breed, and IB for Irish breed. For example, Cree FB denotes that the person is racially a mixture of Cree and French, and Chippewa SB notes that the person is Chippewa and Scotch. Other mixtures of Indians besides the four above specified are rare and may be described by the letters OB for other breed. In this category of the census, people of mixed red and white blood are described as mixtures of Indians. In the 1901 census, the Canadian government classified all people of mixed Indian-European ancestry as Indians. That doesn't mean that there were no Métis people in Canada at that time. I don't think it's surprising that the government's census categories did not acknowledge them. But the point is that when it comes to the 1901 census, the Métis Nation of Ontario cannot claim that persons who were categorized as one of the breeds have automatically been identified as Métis. I'll be talking about the 1899 report on Robinson Treaty annuities in the next video. Let's look at how MNO uses vital statistics records as evidence in its verified Métis family documents. In every verified Métis family document, MNO describes what they call kinship connections. I'll just read a bit of the one I cut and pasted onto this page. The Recollet-Ignace family had numerous kinship connections to other verified Métis family lines that made up the Métis community. Root ancestor descendant Virginie Rock married Pierre Regis de la Morandière in 1867. He is a root ancestor in the de la Morandière Shepherd verified Métis family line. Virginie also witnessed the marriage of her sister, Catherine, to William James Solomon of the Solomon verified Métis family line. This is what MNO calls kinship evidence. I'm not an expert on kinship, but from the definitions I've read, it seems to me that it goes a lot deeper than noting who attended baptisms, marriages, and burials. It involves our relationships with other beings and the earth itself. When it comes to other people, it's about how we behave with our families, how we behave out in our communities, how our families interact, and the relationships that sometimes exist between entire communities. The requirements for membership in the Métis Nation of Ontario do not relate to a distinct Métis identity or to a historic Métis community. Applicants just need a genealogical connection to any mixed ancestry person that lived in the Métis Nation homeland shown in this map, meaning that the ancestor must have lived somewhere, almost anywhere in Ontario, at some point in the last couple of centuries. MNO has all these family names in their database, and they just assign our ancestors to various geographic locations as needed. Instead of linking people together through shared experiences and traditions, they link names together through vital statistics records. In the next section, I'll be talking about families of MNO's Killarney Métis community who lived outside Shebonening. MNO's verified Métis family documents have been publicly available on MNO's website for several years. If you would like to see or download a copy of any family file, they can be obtained at the webpage shown below. You can also click on the link that I put in the description box under this video. Each file is named for a family and has its own number. For example, the Cosley-Riel Verified Métis family is number FL4006. Let's take a look at the evidence MNO used to claim that these families are part of the historic Métis community of Killarney. I'll start with the first 4 families in this list, and I'll be talking about the Solomon family in the next video. In their verified Métis document for the Cosley family, the Métis Nation of Ontario says that the historic record supports a strong inference that the root ancestors were Métis due to, and then they give 3 reasons. The first is the times and places they were documented in more than one historic Métis community. But in another part of the document, MNO says that the Cosleys were mostly found in Blind River, and that Blind River cannot be said to be wholly in either the Sault Ste. Marie or the Killarney Métis community. Another reason MNO gives for saying that the Cosleys are a Métis family is their kinship connections to other verified Métis family lines. But once again, in another part of their document, they say that they cannot find any genealogical connections between the Cosley family and any other family in any Métis community. The third reason MNO gives is inconsistent census enumerations, suggesting that enumerators were not able to categorize them as either white or Indian, as well as the fact that root ancestor descendants are explicitly identified as French B and Indian FB on census records. I don't understand what MNO means by the first part of that statement. It doesn't make sense to me. But the last part is referring to the categories used in the 1901 census. French breed. I showed you earlier that those kinds of categories were defined by government as mixtures of Indians. So MNO's census evidence just shows that members of the Cosley family are of mixed Indian-European ancestry. After all of this non-evidence that MNO presents, and the fact that the Cosleys were found mostly in Blind River, which according to MNO is not wholly in the Sault Ste. Marie or Killarney Métis community, MNO has declared that the Cosley family are members of 2 historic Métis communities, Sault Ste. Marie and Killarney. West Bay on Manitoulin Island is shown on the right side of this map. It was home to the First Nation community that was known by the same name. Today, that community's name is Shiging. MNO claims that one of the families of Shiging, headed by Henry Corbier, is part of the historic Métis community of Killarney. In their verified Métis document, MNO notes that in the 1901 census, the Corbier family were all recorded as being of mixed Indian-European ancestry. They also state in their document that the Corbiers are not connected with any other family in any of the historic Métis communities. On the basis of this evidence, MNO claims that the parents, 3 children, and 22 grandchildren are documented Métis. MNO says that Elizabeth King and 3 of her children are documented Métis because they are shown on the 1901 census as being Algonquin French breed. Elizabeth's children were actually identified as other breed on that census, but their father, Charles King, is listed as an Ottawa Indian. The 1921 census records all of Elizabeth's children as Ottawa, and it also states that their language is Ojibwe. Elizabeth was originally from Shebonaning. Her mother was Rosalie de la Morandière, and her father was Alexander Prue. In 1907, she self-identified as Potawatomi and was included in the Wooster Roll. Canada's Department of Indian Affairs verified the names on that roll and presented it along with a claim to the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs for monies owed to the Canadian branch of the Potawatomis of Wisconsin. I'll include details about that event in a different video, but the data for this family seems to be pretty consistent, and it does not point toward a Métis identity. For the Chimanans family, MNO uses the 1901 census and a birth certificate to claim that they are documented Métis. The birth certificate is from one of the daughters, and on the certificate it says that the mother, Mary, is French and Indian. And that's the evidence that they use. MNO also says that in 1881, John and Mary and their 4 children lived in Killarney. But that is not correct. Between 1861 and 1891, the Canadian census for Killarney included several communities, and one of them was Whitefish Lake. And that is where John and Mary and their children lived in 1881. Here are 2 cropped images from the 1881 Canadian census for Killarney. On the left, I have circled the name Thomas Ross. And if you follow the row for his name, it shows that he was a Presbyterian, that he was Scotch, that his occupation was clerk. And in the circle on the right, I've taken that section and enlarged it so it's easier to read. It says HB Post White F Lake, Hudson Bay Post Whitefish Lake. And the date is May 20, and the name is JNO, which is the short form for John Egan. So John Egan of Killarney took the census for the people of Whitefish Lake starting on May 20th. Underneath the name of Thomas Ross is his family, and then the next family listed is John Chimanans and his wife and children. And they're all listed as Indians, and he is listed as a hunter. These are the first 2 entries in the census of the people of Whitefish Lake. This is the next page of the census, and that red line is underlining the name of Paul Mongoin, who is listed as chief, and you can see at the far right the circle again with the notation Whitefish Lake. And the image below it is just showing the part of the annual report from Indian Affairs in 1881, talking about how they are in process building a school at Whitefish Lake. So that's just another piece of evidence showing that the people of Whitefish Lake were not living in Killarney in 1881. Today, the people of Whitefish Lake are known as Atikameksheng and Anishinaabeg. This is the evidence provided by MNO to support their argument that these four families are documented Métis. In their document, MNO also notes that 3 of these families had no connections to any other family in any of their historic Métis communities. They present no historical evidence about how these people developed a Métis identity while they were raising their children and living their day-to-day lives as members of First Nations communities. There is no evidence in the MNO Family Line documents or in the MNO Ontario Joint Fact Sheet that speaks to how the families living outside of Shebonaning interacted with each other or with the ancestors of my community. Thank you for watching. In the next video, we'll take a closer look at the evidence that MNO and Ontario used to declare that these families in Shebonaning were Métis people.